everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing 2 Speedy book reviews, and I'm going to try and keep this video pretty short. I'm going to try and keep it to the 8-minute mark, but let's see if that actually happens. Firstly, we're going to be talking about Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. Then we're going to be talking about The Memory Policy by Yoko Ogawa. Start off with Neverwhere. So this was my first Neil Gaiman. I find it criminal that as a British person I had never read Neil Gaiman up until this point. Neil Gaiman is everywhere. If you're British, you will see Neil Gaiman's name everywhere. And he's very successful. He's a super successful author. He's had many adaptations of his books. He's got loads of different audiobooks and different dramatizations of his books. Like, he's very, very successful. And so I was really curious, and I'd finished a pretty heavy book and I was looking for something a little bit lighter and that I could get through pretty quickly. So I thought I'd pick up Neverwhere. Now, Neverwhere, it's set in London, but there is also an alternate version of London. And I thought it was quite cool. You know, we follow our main character as he basically accidentally gets involved in this kind of group of misfits, and as part of that he gets kind of sucked into this alternate version of London. And I thought it was fun, you know, I thought it was a fun time. You know, I quite liked Gaiman's writing style. It's very accessible, it's quite conversational, which makes it really, really fast to read. I read it in like 2 or 3 nights because it just read very, very quick. I quite like the fact that it is urban fantasy. I'm not a huge urban fantasy lover, but I do like urban fantasy when it's done well, and I do think this is a version of good urban fantasy. I do like the fact that we have different types of fantasy races in this world as well, and that we have like animals that speak and stuff like that, and they have like personalities and like real sentience, and I thought it was cool. Like, I enjoyed it. My only issue with this book is that I feel like the first half was really promising. Like, I loved the first like 40 to 50%. And then I just got bored really quickly, and it got really predictable really quickly. I think this book would have worked better as a novella. I know Neil Gaiman writes a lot of like short stories and novellas, and I just think this would have worked better as a novella, because it got to the point where it started to drag a bit, and I just lost interest. And I don't think it was because my mood changed, because I was still very engrossed in the other book that I was reading at the same time. It was just, maybe there was like a tonal shift or something, and I just didn't like it. And I felt like the characters were sometimes being overly dense for like no reason, and it was just a bit of a miss for me towards the end of the book. I liked the first half, the second half was a miss, which is very unfortunate. I gave this book a 3 stars. I thought it was average. You know, I wouldn't say it was the worst book in the world, but it was definitely not the best book in the world. I am still very keen to read more Neil Gaiman. I do have a bunch of his other books, so I will definitely pick those up at some point or another. There is a bunch of his adaptations that I really want to watch as well, like American Gods as an example, but ideally I would like to read the book first. But I'm really curious what other people think about this book, because I feel like it gets a lot of love, and I feel like I'm missing something and I don't know what. So if you have read this book, let me know down below, because I'm really curious as to what you thought of it. There was definitely promising parts, it just didn't execute the middle to end bit that I would have liked. Next, we're going to talk about The Memory Policy by Yoko Ogawa. This is a really fantastic book. It is a sci-fi dystopian book that is actually a Japanese book, and it's a piece of translated fiction. It has a very unique plot in some ways, but it also clearly took influence from some of the big dystopian heavy hitters, like George Orwell as an example. So this book is basically set on an island where the inhabitants forget things at random points in time. So they could wake up one morning and the concept of an egg or a plant or a bird would no longer exist in their head. So they would have no memories of that thing anymore, no recollection of how they felt about that thing. The word almost becomes pointless because it loses its meaning, and there's no explanation as to why this happens or why this started happening. So it's a very like unique concept. I've never really heard that before. It is very much run like a police state. I definitely think Ogawa got influence from 1984. It's very much run as a police state by the Memory Police, and they enforce the law, and anyone who tries to hold on to the items that disappear essentially will get taken by the Memory Police. We don't know anything about them. We don't know why they ever came to this island. We don't know, you know, what their motivations are or anything like that. They're basically just this faceless oppressor, which I thought was a really cool element to it. One of the things that I really loved about this book, and was probably my favorite thing about this book, is the atmosphere. It's very oppressive, almost quite claustrophobic. It doesn't feel right. Like, something just feels very off. There is this constant feeling of like discombobulation, especially when the characters first realize something's missing. And I just felt very off as I was reading this book, but like in a good way, because it meant that the author was doing a really good job of communicating that sense of oppressiveness that they were trying to communicate. And I really loved it for that reason. The other thing that I really liked was the thematic discussions. This focuses very much on human relationships and how we all try to find our community even in times of like complete darkness and times of just utter despair. And it also heavily focuses on the whole idea of our sense of self and what makes someone human. Is it our memories? Is it our history? Is it our emotions or understanding attached to those memories? Is it something else? What impact does that have on our psyche when we know we've lost something? And I just think it really brought up some fascinating questions that I'm still thinking about. Like, I read this book a few weeks ago, and I still think about what I would feel like if I woke up and the concept of books just disappeared, or the concept of chocolate disappeared, or the concept of, I don't know, chairs disappeared. Like, you wouldn't think it would have, like, that, let's take that as an example, the concept of chairs. You wouldn't think that would have a big impact on your life, and yet it probably would. And that's what is so interesting is that it focuses on these like really benign objects most of the time, and you wouldn't think, oh, okay, doesn't really matter, eggs have disappeared, okay, it's fine, we can eat other food. But it actually has like deeper consequences than just an egg disappearing and me not being able to eat it. It's much bigger consequences than you initially anticipate. And I just thought that was so fascinating. Such a fascinating concept. I just wish it would have been longer. I would have really liked to have read like a real sci-fi epic. It felt more like a treatise. It felt more like a meditation or a reflection that the author was having. I don't know whether the author was making a point about like Japanese society as a whole. Like, I honestly have no clue. I would have loved this to have been on an even grander scale. That's really a personal preference thing. It's no personal thing against the author. It's just I would have liked more. The only thing I didn't really like about this book was the translation. It wasn't the best. There were a lot of typos which took me out. Some of the sentences weren't formulated the best, so that took me out. I don't know if I had maybe an old translated version and there's a more updated version. I wouldn't say, you know, don't read it because of that. I think you'll be able to get by, but just be aware going into it that I did have that issue. So if you do see that, it's not you. It's very much a publishing problem rather than a you problem. I gave this book 4 stars. I just thought it was a really solid sci-fi dystopian novel that was definitely a different take than what we typically get in this genre. And I've not met anybody who's read this one, so if you've read it, let me know down below because I'd love to chat about it with you. And yeah, that's it for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed these really speedy book reviews. I'll see you down in the comments. As always, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.